You mentioned in the acknowledgement section of Minister Without Portfolio that you thank people for helping you with the dialogue. Could you explain what kind of help you needed with the dialogue? It seems so natural and so wonderful.
Well, I keep a notebook, and when people say things in an interesting way, I write it down. Mm-hmm. And so I felt like it was only, the honorable thing to do would be to mention everybody whose speech I had taken from life, without attributing it directly to them. Mm-hmm. I would just thank them in the back of the book for the things that they said, and so that's where that came about.
And do you get good editorial assistance from your publisher or publishers? Do they?
Oh yeah, I did a workshop with my editor one time about a novel. They wanted to have on stage a sort of a discussion between an editor and the writer about the making of a book, and I thought, well, I don't even know why they want my editor there. Like, I wrote the book. It's, I'm the one who wrote the book, but I guess I'll share the stage with her, and I thought beforehand, before I got on stage, I thought I should just go over our correspondence over the last 3 years of writing the book. And I was reading the emails from her and realizing just how much input she had into directing me through the choices, and the brilliance of a great editor is someone like that who can guide a writer to making a more accurate book of in the goal of what they were setting out to do. Not to prescribing their sense of what they think the book should be, but just gently nudging you towards things that you slightly had articulated but hadn't quite fleshed out on the page. And that's what she had done. And in the correspondence, I saw this major influence on me that in a good editor, she knows that I'm almost not understanding the thing that she's doing, which is great in an editor. So I felt very humbled by realizing that she had a lot to do with the book.
I was taken also with your story of the short story you submitted to the CBC radio short story contest, which was 2,500 words too long, and you cut it down, and they loved it. And I've noticed in some of your narratives that from sentence to sentence there's a big surprise, as if something had been cut out along the way. Is this a habitual practice, a stylistic technique that you use consciously?
Yeah, it's a ruthless thing. A friend of mine, Mark Jarman, who's a writer in New Brunswick, he told me this a long time ago. He said, if you're having trouble with a passage, just cut it. Just remove it from the text. Don't try to fix it. Just delete it and move on. And now to do that requires when you work on something for a while, for a few days, you're working on a scene for a few days, and it doesn't quite work, you want to save it because you've put work in there.
That's right.
You've invested some time, energy, and creativity in it, and you kind of still want it to hobble around, even though it's got 2 broken legs and is in a coma, and to be able to say, no, I'm going to delete it because it isn't working, is to say those 3 days of work are for naught.
That takes courage, I should imagine.
Well, the thing is, what happens is, it's a strange thing. The fact that you wrote that scene and deleted it doesn't mean that scene is no longer in the book. It's still there. This is the magic of narrative. In some ways, it has affected what has come before and what comes after. And the echo of that scene is still there. I had my teacher in creative writing, Larry Matthews. We used to meet together, myself and Larry Matthews, Lisa Moore, Ramona Deering, a couple of other people. We would read out our stories that we were working on. Every 2 weeks we'd get together, and Larry would always bring half of a story that he'd written. And he'd read it out, and then he'd say, so what's going to happen next? And he'd ask everybody, and we'd all say, well, this is what's going to happen, and this character's going to do this, and that person's going to end up there. And he'd listen to it all, and 2 weeks later, he'd have the other half of the story, and none of what we said would be in there. He would have a completely new ending to the story, and I asked him why he did that. And he said, well, if you could guess all those things, are going to happen, then they're already in the story. I don't have to write those things out. It really was an interesting way of creating a bigger work. Doing that, of course, it's harder work because you're writing all these scenes that no longer, there are lots of scenes there that you're no longer going to write. But I've sort of applied that to my fiction. I'm ruthless. I cut things. So you have to sort of sometimes deal with your own laziness to actually fix things. So some things are really important that if you spend a couple more hours on, you will successfully create the scene. So now I'm battling between, do I just delete or do I invest another few hours in making this story come to life?
It's something like Ezra Pound deleting, cutting T.S. Eliot's Wasteland.
Oh yeah, it's
Il Miglior Fabbro, the better maker. You do it yourself. That sounds as if also you had good experience working with people in a creative writing context. That was at Memorial?
That's right, yeah.
How was the atmosphere there for promoting writing and bringing writers along?
It's great. I mean, when I was starting out, there would be a couple of public reading events that were funded by the Canada Council, I guess, and we would invite Canadian writers into Newfoundland to give a reading. And it never seemed to happen the other way. Like Newfoundland writers were never invited, to Canada to give a reading. So we were having this reading series. We were having these Canadian writers, and so we just sort of took it upon ourselves to throw ourselves into Canada and to make our own readings and tour the nation, sort of just in an organic way, sort of renting a car and driving across and doing these individual readings. So to do that, we needed people around us to encourage us and to say that what you're doing is interesting, just as interesting as what's happening elsewhere. And also a few predecessors who didn't do what we were doing. I'm thinking of somebody like Helen Porter, who is a generation older than me, who has written some marvelous books, but within her generation, there wasn't a system in place for her to become a national writer. But she was happy enough to get published locally in Newfoundland and to be read locally in Newfoundland. And for us, we wanted something more. We wanted to be read across Canada and internationally. So we had that ambition. It wasn't that we were any better than Helen Porter. In fact, we aren't. We're just as, she's just as good as the writing we do. But we had people around us who encouraged us and our own ambition to create. And I think those two things together, there was never a sense amongst us of competition, in a negative sense. We never thought, like I met somebody in Toronto, a Toronto writer, who once said of another writer, oh, they're breathing my air. And I didn't know what he meant. But what he meant was, if not for this other writer, he would be in that place with the publicity and the people reading him. And we've never thought that way. We're always of the mindset that a high tide raises all boats. What was good for one of us would help another person. And I think that's really helped us all, have healthy careers as writers.
It sounds like a sense of family transposed to a literary community.
For sure, yeah, a healthy family. Yeah.
Yes.